Last time, we discussed how barter economies can create currencies out of nothing. Today, we'll be discussing how currencies can also arise from purposeful planning and creation. In a tropical bay near the equator of my world, people buy and sell things using shells. Now, one cannot simply go to the beach, pick up some shells, and head to the market. And not just any shell will do. The shells the bay people use are of a specific species of clam, which we call the ponderous arc. These shells are extremely common, easy to identify, and very sturdy, and thus usually found intact, unlike other shells. And the harvesting of these shells is handled by a professional class of beachcombers, using long nets and bags woven of coconut fiber to sift the sands and collect arc shells from the surf. The beachcombers do not use the shells right away, though. They must first turn them in to the priestly authority. The priests perform several rituals in order to purify the shells. Firstly, they are sorted for uniform size, cleaned, counted, and often painted with a wide black stripe on their underside. They have holes drilled into them, allowing them to be strung together. Some even wear their money as jewelry if they feel like showing off, or if it makes them feel more secure than simply keeping the money in a bag. Lastly, the shells are placed in coconut fiber bags and buried by the priests. The priests, paying mind to many omens read from the stars, the waves of the ocean, and from the dips and highs of the market, determine when to add new currency to the economy. When they deem it fit, new currency is added by exhuming some buried shells and distributing them in the form of loans and lines of credit to the nobility, who in turn purchase goods and employ workers, disseminating the new currency throughout the economy. A small middle class of people is formed by those without the sacred permission to receive loans from the priests, but who instead must loan from the nobility. These are typically artisans of all sorts, as well as smaller plantation owners. Beneath them are the peasant bay people, who cannot afford any sorts of loans and must trade their labor for money. While most peasants have a small amount of land on which they can grow potatoes and other vegetables, or raise pigs for slaughter, this land is usually owned by plantation owners or the nobility, and so the peasants must pay rent, in addition to other necessities of life usually being owned by artisans, plantation owners, or the nobility. One good is owned exclusively by the nobility, the banana. Bananas are not native to the bay, having been brought from further south by traders, and they don't grow well in the native soil, which must be frequently fertilized and densely mulched in order to grow the yellow fruit. Because of this, the growing of bananas is financially prohibitive for peasants or middle-class plantation owners. The goods their groves produce bring in great quantities of wealth for the nobility, in the form of the fruits, banana silk, and palm wine. Banana silk is almost exclusively worn by the nobility, with some nobles going so far as to prohibit their peasants from purchasing the cloth, only allowing them access to cloth woven from the fibers of cultivated roses and mulberry trees for their clothing. One way for a peasant to find upward mobility in society is to become a beachcomber. However, not just any old bum can go beachcombing for a living. As a sacred role, the priests are in charge of how many beachcombers are allowed to exist, and how many shells beachcombers are allowed to bring in every day. They also determine the pay of the combers, based on how many of the shells a comber turns in meet standards of quality. Particularly skilled beachcombers may even be approved for loans directly from the priesthood, allowing them access to higher class status and more access to wealth. Whenever a lucky beachcomber becomes a plantation owner, or when a beachcomber dies, the position becomes open again for young men to compete for. Many peasant families attempt to train their sons to become future beachcombers in the hopes they can lift their family out of poverty if successful. Hope you all enjoyed that, but while I've got your attention here, I'd like to spotlight two of my fellow creators. First of all, and apologies for missing him last time, I'd like to introduce you all to James. He has one video out at the moment about his conlang agere, which is just the bee's knees in my opinion. Agere is mostly inspired by Greek and Finnish, so it's got really rich inflection, and the phono-aesthetic notes really shine through. It just sounds good, and the grammar is both skillfully made and presented really well. If you like Biblaridian, you will like James' Agere video, I promise. Secondly, I'd like to showcase cayenne. He has two showcases for conlangs of his own, and also one for Klingon, but with this really great twist of them being presented as newscasts on the Interdimensional News Network. It's really great, and his two conlings are rad as hell. One of them is a relative of English spoken in an isolated magical community, and the other is a really interesting alien language. He also has videos on other topics such as magical languages, invisibility, industrialization, battlefield tactics involving dragons, and others. Definitely go give his content a watch. If you have some conlanging or world building content you'd like me to spotlight, send me an email at junodoesworldbuilding@gmail.com with important information such as your pronouns, or I will get them wrong on purpose. Also, I have a Patreon now, which, if you feel so inclined, you can subscribe to for my Patreon feed, which is full of extra content, early access to videos, and the greatest reward I could think of, choosing the subjects of future episodes of Retconlang. Praise be the algorithm. Go, my friends, in the name of like, share, subscribe.